She was the woman everyone admired, polished, poised, and powerful in her white coat, delivering hope where others feared the worst. He was the man locked away, forgotten, feared, and shaped by violence. Two souls from opposite worlds, stitched together by what some called fate, and others would later call madness. They said she was too smart to be fooled, too seasoned to be swept away. But love, as we've seen before, doesn't always come dressed in roses and candlelight. Sometimes, it arrives with shadows trailing behind. And when it does, even the brightest minds can find themselves trapped in the darkest rooms. How does a healer become the patient? How does devotion become a ritual of terror? This isn't just a cautionary tale. It's a descent into trust twisted beyond recognition. Before we unseal the case that silenced a city, like this video and subscribe for more chilling true crime stories where love doesn't just hurt, it haunts. Dr. Ayanna Briscoe had the kind of resume most could only dream of. At 39, she was already a board-certified gynecologist, a Howard University alumna, and one of the youngest keynote speakers at the prestigious Women in Medicine conference. She walked the polished halls of St. Jude Medical Center in Atlanta with a quiet authority, her heels clicking like punctuation marks, her words always measured, her presence calming. Patients trusted her. Interns idolized her. Church members bragged that she was one of their own, a woman of faith, excellence, and grace. She drove a pearl-white Mercedes, wore her natural hair in a sleek chignon, and lived in a craftsman-style home on Shepperton Lane lined with rose bushes she pruned herself every Saturday morning. There was always gospel music playing faintly in the background, the scent of lavender oil lingering in the air. A life so put together, so carefully curated, it would take a trained eye to see the tiny fractures underneath. Because behind the diplomas, the accolades, and the Sunday school smiles was a woman in mourning. Her marriage had ended 6 months ago, quietly, cleanly, with no dramatic fights or custody battles. Just a cold, agreed-upon silence after the third miscarriage. Her ex-husband, Julian, a biomedical engineer, had once been the kind of man who made her believe God had answered her prayers. But repeated loss can turn devotion into distance. And for Ayanna, each failed pregnancy felt like her body was betraying not just her, but her entire purpose. She stopped attending baby showers. She stopped visiting her goddaughter. She even stopped praying with the same urgency. Grief made her precise and withdrawn. Her smile turned thinner. Her joy more calculated. She could still deliver babies, still counsel young mothers on postpartum care. But when she looked in the mirror, the woman staring back was someone else. Someone hollow. Someone unfinished. It was her therapist who first suggested the pen pal program. Do something outside of medicine, she said. Something that doesn't require you to fix or diagnose. Just feel. So, Ayanna signed up for Letters of Grace, a prison outreach initiative run by her church's restorative justice ministry. It was supposed to be simple, harmless, a spiritual act of empathy. She requested no violent offenders. She only wanted to write, not visit. She wasn't looking for excitement, or transformation, or romance. She was just looking for something quiet, something pure. But when she opened the first letter addressed to her from Fulton County Correctional, what she found instead was a voice that knew exactly where her pain lived. And so began the unraveling. Kentrell Maddox had spent the last 9 years behind bars at Fulton County Correctional, wearing a number instead of a name. Convicted at 28 for a violent assault that left a man in a coma, he was serving a 17-year sentence with 8 more to go. On paper, he was another statistic, a product of a rough South Atlanta upbringing, a former aspiring poet who'd once dreamed of teaching literature, derailed by drugs, rage, and one night that changed everything. But the man who wrote to Dr. Ayanna Briscoe wasn't the thug described in court documents. He was something else entirely. His first letter arrived handwritten on a yellow legal pad, the ink dark, deliberate, almost romantic in its discipline. It began with a question that echoed in Ayanna's chest long after she finished reading. Do you believe broken people can still heal others? Or are we all just walking wounds, infecting everyone we touch? She read it 3 times before responding. There was no clumsy flirtation, no prison cliché. Instead, Kentrell wrote with the kind of soul that made you lean in. It was impossible not to be moved. Their letters turned into exchanges twice a week, then daily, then calls, then approved visitation. The first time Ayanna saw him in person, he wore a beige jumpsuit and a crooked half-smile. His eyes, dark, watchful, met hers through the glass, and something in her trembled. Not from fear, from recognition. He looked like a man carrying 1,000 secrets, and she felt, for once, like she was allowed to put hers down too. He was articulate, charismatic, disarming in his vulnerability. They shared stories they hadn't told anyone else. He asked about her miscarriages, not with pity, but with curiosity and gentleness. "You ever feel like your grief has a voice?" He whispered one day. "Because mine sings to me every night." Ayanna no longer felt like a woman unraveling. She felt seen and needed. By the time she accepted his marriage proposal, it didn't feel impulsive, it felt inevitable. There was no church ceremony, no family celebration, no white dress. Just a prison visiting room, a trembling signature, and the soft clink of a ring sliding onto her finger. She told no one, not her mother, not her pastor, not even her therapist. To the world, Dr. Ayanna Briscoe was still the poised, immaculate gynecologist with the gentle voice and steady hands. But inside, she belonged to a man in a cage. And she believed, desperately, dangerously, that he belonged to her too. Kentrell was released 3 years earlier than expected, cited for good behavior, therapy milestones, and overcrowding. The state made it sound procedural, efficient, but to Ayanna, it felt divine. As if their long-awaited chapter was finally being written in the ink of mercy. She picked him up in a rented silver SUV, a bouquet of fresh lilies on the passenger seat and a soft jazz playlist humming from the speakers. He stepped out of the facility thinner than she remembered, but his eyes were just as sharp, still dark, still searching. When he wrapped his arms around her, she felt safe, anchored, finally whole. Their first week together was a dream painted in soft brushstrokes. Ayanna had transformed the spare bedroom into a study just for him, with leather-bound books, a cherrywood desk, and hand-poured candles she'd bought online. He cooked breakfast every morning, eggs scrambled with a side of jazz, sometimes a poem tucked into her napkin. They slow-danced barefoot in the kitchen. He brought her garden roses every Friday, deep crimson ones that looked like velvet wounds. It was everything she thought love should be: restorative, gentle, and earned. But then came the knives. At first, it was subtle. One morning after work, she reached for her favorite paring knife, an ivory-handled tool she'd had since medical school, and found it missing. Instead, the entire knife block had been rearranged. Serrated knives up front, cleavers in back. A strange, almost surgical symmetry. She assumed he was trying to be helpful. When she mentioned it casually, he smiled. "I just like when things make sense," he said, brushing a kiss against her temple. But it kept happening. Every time she fixed it, he'd move them again, always the same pattern, always without a word. Then came the whispering. It started one night while she was half asleep. A sound barely audible, hovering over her like a draft. She opened her eyes and found him standing at the edge of the bed, eyes wide, watching her. His lips were moving. She couldn't make out the words. "Kentrell?" He blinked like he'd just returned from somewhere far. "Sorry. I couldn't sleep. Just thinking." He got back into bed, but she didn't sleep the rest of the night. Weeks later, she found one of her old medical anatomy charts in the trash, ripped down the middle. The uterus diagram she used for patient education was shredded, parts of it stained with something dark. She asked if he'd seen it. "Some things just don't need to be displayed," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. It was small, maybe petty, but it felt deliberate. Then came the garden. Ayanna had a patch of soil behind the house she'd always meant to cultivate, but never got around to. One afternoon, she came home early and caught Kentrell crouched in the middle of it, hands buried elbow-deep in the dirt. A shovel lay nearby. His shirt was off, and his chest was streaked with sweat and mud. He looked startled when she called his name. "Just planting something for us," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But no seeds ever appeared. No pots. No gardening gloves. No mulch. Nothing but a patch of upturned earth that grew darker every week. She tried to dismiss it, told herself it was trauma, adjustment, a man learning freedom again. But the unease had already begun to bloom inside her, like a bruise beneath the skin. What had started as a love story now felt like something older, something colder, something slowly waking up. And every night, as she drifted off beside him, she found herself listening for the whisper, for the scrape of a shovel, for the quiet shift of knives. The smell hit her first. It was metallic, sharp, and wrong like blood and burnt coins. Ayanna stepped into the kitchen and saw steam curling from the stove. The pot was covered, trembling slightly with pressure, its lid clattering in irregular beats like a heart in distress. She moved closer, hand trembling as she reached for a towel. Inside, her wedding ring floated in a violent boil, spinning like a trapped insect. The gold had darkened, warped. Its engraving "Grace chose us" had been scorched into eligibility. Her breath was shallow, heartbeat rioting in her chest. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply turned and walked out, leaving the door unlocked and the pot still boiling. Lakinda barely recognized her at the hotel. She opened the door in a silk robe and dropped her wine glass at the sight of her friend, shaking, pale, hollow-eyed. Ayanna collapsed on the bed. It took nearly 30 minutes before she could speak. When she did, her voice was distant, robotic. "I think he's unraveling," she whispered. Lakinda was already dialing 911. Ayanna grabbed the phone and hung it up. "No," she said. "He's not evil. He's hurt." Lakinda stared at her like she was insane. "Ayanna, he boiled your wedding ring. He carved into your counter with a scalpel. You think this man needs a hug? He's been in a cage for 14 years. That changes people. That doesn't explain this." Ayanna curled up in the hotel bed like a child. For hours, Lakinda tried to talk sense into her, reminding her of the warning signs, of the whispers, of the knives, of the garden. But Ayanna kept defending him in soft murmurs, her tone laced with the kind of devotion that sounds a lot like delusion. The next morning, she was gone. The hotel clerk remembered her leaving just after sunrise. No luggage, no shoes, just a white cardigan wrapped around her shoulders and a distant look in her eyes. Lakinda tried calling, dozens of times. No answer. She went to Ayanna's house. The car was in the driveway, but the lights were off. The door was locked. By the second day, Lakinda filed a missing persons report. By the third day, even the police started to sound nervous, but grew more curious and took actions after receiving another call, this time from a widowed neighbor. It was the smell again. A neighbor, retired, widowed, known to walk her dog religiously at 6 a.m., was the first to call. She said something was off, that the Briscoes' house, always manicured and still, had a strange scent leaking from the cracks in the windows, like rotting meat and bleach, like something wet and electric. When the police arrived, the silence inside was too perfect. No television, no murmured music, just the steady hum of the air conditioning pushing cold air through warm horror. They breached the door with a crowbar, guns drawn, flashlights sweeping the walls. The living room was untouched. Framed certificates still hung neatly. Dr. Ayanna Briscoe, OB-GYN, Howard University, class of 2008. Photos of mission trips to Ghana, speaking engagements, white coat ceremonies. Nothing to suggest the hell that waited beneath their feet. The basement door was locked from the inside. They kicked it in and descended. At first, it looked like a clinic, sterile tile, LED surgery lights overhead, a brushed steel operating table centered beneath a crucifix. But the light flickered erratically. The crucifix was smeared in something dark. And the table was soaked through. Strapped to it was Ayanna. Barely conscious, pale, eyes fluttering open and closed in a slow, drugged rhythm. Her mouth was gagged. Her wrists were tied with 4 tubing, her legs restrained with leather stirrups from her own practice. Her abdomen was sliced, neatly, surgically, not deep enough to kill but deep enough to scream. except she couldn't. He'd taken that too. In the corner, bathed in candlelight, Kentrell sat rocking in her surgical robe. Not his robe, hers. The name badge still clung to his chest, though it had been painted over with crude red streaks. In his lap was her dead cat, Simon, the one she'd bottle-fed through med school. He had threaded the stethoscope through its neck like a noose, its tiny corpse swaying as he whispered to it. Open notebooks lay around him, Ayanna's medical journals, pages torn out, rewritten, and scribbled over in something too dark to be ink. Kentrell smiled for the camera. A rehearsed, sinister smile. "Hey, y'all," he said in a syrupy tone. "Welcome back to Healing Hour with Dr. K. Today we're going to talk about how to remove a spirit of grief from the gut. It's all in the incision." He turned to Ayanna. "This one's special," he whispered, brushing her cheek. "She couldn't let go of the babies, so I'm helping her." The scalpel gleamed. In the real basement, Kentrell didn't flinch when the cop screamed at him to stand down. He didn't blink. He simply lifted Simon's lifeless head and kissed it gently. "She's clean now," he said. "Pure. I took the grief out." He raised his hands, palms coated in blood, and offered them to the darkness like a child seeking praise. "She fixed me first. It was only fair." They found 7 videos total, each one sicker than the last. In one, he lectured about postpartum depression, miming empathy, while Ayanna sobbed in the background. In another, he spoke about the soul wound of infertility, pausing to trace her C-section scar with a blade. He used her name badge, her voice recordings, her stethoscope. Every tool she had once used to bring life into the world was now repurposed into a theater of madness. When they carried her out, Ayanna was barely breathing, one eye swollen shut, the other open, glassy, unseeing. Her body told the story her mouth could not. But even as they wheeled her into the ambulance, Kentrell sat cross-legged on the floor, humming a lullaby, cradling the cat like a newborn. "They won't understand us," he whispered. "Not yet." Then he smiled, wide and bloody. "But they will." The trial of Kentrell Maddox was unlike anything the state of Maryland had ever witnessed. From the moment jury selection began, there was an unease in the air, a tension that clung to the courthouse like humidity before a storm. The gallery was packed. Press, community leaders, law students, trauma specialists, and women from local shelters clutching each other's hands like lifelines. The first day of testimony was prefaced by a warning from the judge. The evidence to be presented would be disturbing, graphic, and potentially traumatizing. Even that fell short of preparing them for what would unfold. Kentrell Maddox walked into the courtroom wearing a beige jumpsuit, his wrists shackled but his chin high. He scanned the room with a faint smirk, as though he were the only one in on a secret. When asked to state his name, he added quietly, "Dr. Maddox, spirit surgeon." The courtroom rustled with murmurs. The judge banged the gavel. But it was during his own chilling statement to the court that the horror became almost too much to bear. "She never loved me," Kentrell said, turning slightly to glance toward the back of the courtroom, where Ayanna sat in a wheelchair, draped in black, her face partially obscured by a scarf and sunglasses. "But she birthed something in me, something divine. And that was love too." Gasps filled the room. The prosecution wasted no time. They called it what it was: domestic terrorism of the most perverse kind. Over the course of 3 weeks, jurors were forced to watch selected clips from the 7 video recordings Kentrell had made. Some wept openly. One juror had to be excused after fainting. A court clerk vomited into a wastebasket when the footage revealed Kentrell gleefully explaining an emotional hysterectomy before carving symbols into Ayanna's abdomen with surgical precision. The judge himself asked for multiple recesses. The media was banned from airing the videos, but transcripts and summaries released later ignited a nationwide firestorm. Then came a discovery that sent the entire courtroom and the country into a tailspin. Hidden in a locked compartment behind a false panel in Kentrell and Ayanna's basement, investigators found a manuscript, nearly 400 handwritten pages, a manifesto titled "The Doctrine of Reverse Healing." It was part delusion, part doctrine, part diary, and entirely unhinged. In it, Kentrell detailed plans for a spiritual clinic that would operate underground. He had written out mock medical charts, fake case studies, diagrams of procedures meant to cut sorrow from the body and bleed sin from the womb. There were names 3 women from the prison pen pal program he had corresponded with briefly before Ayanna. All had cut off contact with him within weeks. 2 had filed complaints. 1 had mysteriously relocated months prior. Investigators reopened those cases. Only 1 was ever found again. She refused to testify, citing fear for her life. Kentrell's writings revealed he had been practicing. Ayanna was simply the first to trust him fully. The press latched on to every word. Cable news anchors referred to him as the reverse surgeon. Talk shows debated whether this was an isolated incident or the rise of a new form of psychological terrorism. Hashtags exploded across social media. Hashtag justice for Ayanna, hashtag reverse healing, hashtag spiritual surgery. Documentaries were pitched before the sentencing was even handed down. Survivors groups rallied in support of Ayanna. Church circles that once praised her discretion and spiritual strength were now offering public apologies for encouraging the pen pal program at all. When the sentence came, it landed like a thunderclap. 8 life sentences without the possibility of parole. An additional 270 years tacked on for aggravated assault, kidnapping, torture, unauthorized medical practice, and obstruction of justice. The judge looked directly at Kentrell and said, "You did not simply mutilate a woman, you mutilated the very idea of love, healing, and redemption." Kentrell didn't flinch. He smiled, then said, "I did what doctors do. I healed her." Ayanna, for her part, refused to take the stand. Her lawyer said she'd already endured enough public exposure. But the courtroom was dead silent as she was wheeled out at the trial's conclusion, a shawl pulled around her thin frame, her hands trembling in her lap. Survivors everywhere whispered her name like a warning, like a prayer. And behind it all lingered one haunting truth. Sometimes, monsters don't claw their way into your world. Sometimes, you open the door, invite them in, and call it love. Could Ayanna have saved herself by walking away sooner? Or was Kentrell always waiting for the perfect patient to become his prisoner? If this story disturbed you, like and subscribe for more haunting true stories where love becomes the deadliest diagnosis.